So hi there, my name is Tony, I'm from Chartbeat. We provide real-time analytics to pretty much every major publisher in the US and in 37 countries around the world. And today I have about 15 minutes to talk you through all the core principles you need to know about how to use real-time data successfully in your companies. And I don't have a PowerPoint deck to show you today. We banned PowerPoint about 3 years ago from the company. Which has been awesome, by the way. And I saw a few people on Twitter just before, so just some general housekeeping. All positive comments about this talk should go on Twitter with the hashtag awesome. And all negative comments about this talk should go on Google+. So, yeah, real-time data, what the hell, why do we use it at all? And we think about the kind of traditional purpose of analytics or data, beyond basic reporting. It was to use historical data to try and create a model of the future that we could predict against. Should the button be on the left or the right? Will my lemonade stand sell more lemonade if I put the word fresh on it? And this is incredibly powerful. It's the basis of most modern analytics. However, there is a challenge in that as our world gets more and more complex, as we move towards trying to make more and more complex decisions, the number of variables that affect these outcomes start to multiply, and our ability to successfully predict the future from historical data starts to break down. To quote my favorite philosopher, Mike Tyson, everyone has a strategy until they get punched in the face. Now, this is made worse by the fact that the people who are making these predictions, they're us. And when it comes to making predictions, we kind of suck. There are two great Harvard researchers, Albert and Reifer, kings of the decision-making sciences. And they did a series of studies where they asked people to answer a question with a ranged answer. So, Catherine the Great had between 5 and 50 lovers. Facebook's valuation of its stock next year will be between $20 and $70. And they could make the range as wide as they liked, as long as they felt they had a 98% chance of accuracy. And so, Albert and Reifer, when they looked at the data, they expected to see a 2% error rate. Instead, what they saw was an error rate of between 15 and 30%. Even when we can give the widest possible range of our imagination, we're still often wrong up to a third of the time. And my favorite thing about this study, is they then did it again with a bunch of Harvard MBAs, and the error rate went up to 45%. Now, I think that's funny. I think that's funny. But it also tells us something important, which is the more expert we believe ourselves to be, the more that we think our gut can instinctively know the future, the more likely we are to be dead wrong. And it was this dilemma, this problem of a complex, unpredictable future that obsessed some of the great kind of business visionaries of the last half century. And they began to think about a solution to that challenge using real-time data. People like Taiichi Ohno from Toyota dreamed of a business that worked like a human body, constantly adapting and attuned to the environment of the moment. Now, when I say they intended to use real-time data to do this, they didn't think about just making analytics a little bit faster and accelerated business as usual. They thought faster complex predictions about an uncertain future would just be shittier complex predictions. Instead, they wanted to replace complex predictions of an uncertain future with simple, tactical responses to a certain now. Completely different mode of thinking. We think about how this applies to advertising. Traditional advertising starts with a guy in ad ops who says, I think the health special this year is going to get around 2.2 million page views. We did 2 million last year, 2.2 this year, sounds good. The ad sales guy then takes that prediction and layers on other predictions about the demographic makeup of that predicted audience. And then they go out and sell it. And sometimes they're right. And often they're wrong. Spikes happen, a story somewhere else takes away all your traffic, or that special on hemorrhoids that you worked so hard on just doesn't quite reach its audience. Which for ad ops, by the way, can be a real pain in the ass. So what happens then? What happens when real-time data meets advertising? It doesn't just make that whole process faster. You don't see ad sales people acting like old-school stock traders trying to sell ads in real time. Instead, you saw simple tactical responses. Guy comes to a website. Site says, hey, I've got Jem here. He likes bowling and BMWs. Advertising platform says, hey, I want that guy. Bids for him, serves him an ad. For all of its technological complexity, real-time bidding and advertising is essentially a very simple tactical response. But if you're going to do this, you have to understand that real-time data, as powerful as it is, real-time data isn't worth a damn unless you can respond in real time. If your organization is not set up to respond, real-time data is just triviality. If you think about publishing, the traditional digital publishers still had that fire and forget philosophy that they took from print. An editor at the beginning of the day would try and work out what he thought would have the most impact on his audience, push that out there, and then hope for the best. And even if they wanted to change, they found it difficult. CMSs were slow and unwieldy. It was hard to change anything. And the hierarchy of the organization meant that very few people even had the authority to do so. So into that world came a new breed of publishers. People like Paul Berry at the Huffington Post, Nick Denton at Gawker, who thought they could use real-time data to disrupt their industry. Now, the first thing they did was they eschewed the old way of doing things. They ignored the old traditional enterprise CMSs in favor of building their own custom builds, often on top of blogging platforms. For them, speed was more important than polish. It became the work of seconds to adapt landing pages, change headlines, add images, rich media. They put their teams in a position to respond. But it was more than just tools. There was organizational culture to be dealt with here as well. Because for them to make this happen, they had to democratize decision-making throughout the organization. They had to make every editor, every person who could touch the site responsible for making change. And this was huge. Because if you think about it, this is asking people to go from being relied upon to follow orders to being trusted to make decisions. It truly is a democratized decision-making process within the company. And so other companies saw this, and they saw the power of this, and they tried to copy it. And often it failed. And the reason why it failed was that the data, that real-time data, was still in the hands of the traditional consumers of data within that organization, the back-office analytics team. But the problem was, by the time they had accumulated, cogitated, and disseminated the reports, it was too damn late. And so these organizations realized that if they were going to successfully use real-time data, they had to put it directly in the hands of those most able to make change. The person who acted, the decision maker, and the person getting the data were now one and the same person. Now, when it comes to this, when you're changing the audience for data, just as you've changed the purpose of data, you also have to change the way data is communicated. Your frontline teams don't have the same skill sets, use cases, backgrounds as your data scientists. They can't look at an Excel spreadsheet as if it were poetry. And so what happened was organizations started realizing this and started investing in tools that spoke directly to those frontline teams. Instead of data being a report that you looked at the end of the day, suddenly it was pulsing with live data from screens around their offices. It was overlaid over their sites. It was an ambient environment of data that was personal, highly visual, and intended for the specific use cases of those front lines. Steve Jobs got this, by the way. 1984, releasing the Macintosh, he realized that it wasn't enough to simply give us all a little mini mainframe with a blinking command line. Instead, he introduced the graphical user interface. If you change the audience for data, you have to change the way that data is communicated. And so, if you can do this, if you can follow these principles, if you make sure that you are looking for where you're making big predictions in your company, which may have a certain amount of uncertainty around them, and if you're okay, where can we replace these complex strategic predictions with simple tactical responses? If you're putting the data directly in the hands of your frontline teams and giving them the authority and the ability to make change, and if you're communicating that data in a way that makes implicit sense so that it's an ambient part of their environment, then you can have a company as adaptive and as attuned as the human body itself. Thank you very much.
All right. Take a seat.
Take a seat?
Take a seat.
Take a seat?
I don't want to stand. So that was a great presentation. And for those of you who haven't used Chartbeat before, it'd be good just to give like a little better. The cool thing about Chartbeat is if you have, say, a blog post online, you can actually watch as like people are hitting your site and see which articles are trending at a given time. And I know when I was at TechCrunch, there were several writers who were very much obsessed with watching their own performance on Chartbeat. I actually did my best to abstain because my concern was that you can get a little obsessed over what's doing well, which brings me to my first question. And it's a little cynical, I think, but
shocking.
Yeah, shocking. So is there a point where you can take the analyzing real-time data too far? Because I'm picturing a scenario. So like Huffington Post, for example, will A/B test titles and images to see which one perform best, and they'll tweak it based on which one's getting the most traffic. What if you could A/B test sentences or words, right? Like, at what point does this start leading to some bizarre story that evolves to suit the lowest common denominator and just get the most traffic?
This is the tyranny of the popular, where we all start writing Lindsay Lohan stories because it's that's what everyone wants.
So I guess the question is, when you talk to publishers, do you say, you're going to have, or at least your writers, because you're putting these tools in the front lines, as you were saying, is there this responsibility that the publishers and these writers have to make sure they're not taking it too far, that at some point the data and the analytics have their place, but it's still the editorial judgment still has a strong role in that?
Well, so one of the things that it turns out is that most people don't go into journalism to make money. They actually have a sense of mission around there, which no data in the world can get away from. But it's often a common fear that people have that, oh my God, suddenly this data is going to do it, and I'm going to transform from this principled journalist into this person just like following celebrities around and trying to take pictures. And it turns out not to be true. And I remember, so Kevin Delaney, who was the former editor of the Wall Street Journal, he's just moved to the Atlantic. He said, no matter what the data tells me, I'm always going to have that story about Afghanistan up there at the top. And I think that's incredibly important. But I think it's not just important to write that story. I think it's really important for people to read it. And so if you have a great, important story that's hidden behind the wrong headline, or if you've buried the lead in the fourth paragraph and you can see that people are only scrolling down to the second, then maybe you can adapt it and get your message out. Because the core of good journalism is about not just writing, it's about communication. So that's what that data enables you to do.
And do you see, again, going the cynical route, the sites you named that were sort of at the forefront of using data to help determine what they're publishing and when, and in the platform, the Huffington Post and Gawker, neither of which I think are what I would consider beacons of fine journalism. No offense, I mean, to be fair, like each of them breaks like
If you
stories.
like Tim Tebow stories, though.
Yeah. I mean, and they do break some legit stories, but if you, on a day-to-day basis, you're going to these sites and like, there's a lot of trashy stuff. Do you think this is just a result of they happen to be first, and that over time we're actually going to see better journalism emerge as a result of people kind of fine-tuning? Basically what you're saying, where they have this really well-crafted journalism that isn't getting the attention it deserves because of these tweaks to like headlines and so on. Do you think we're going to see?
I think why it started there was that these were people who were digital natives to begin with. They didn't have a huge legacy, and they didn't necessarily have the resources when they started, just as in some ways very similar to the internet itself. The internet started out kind of trashy, and they didn't have the resources to be sending journalists everywhere and to be doing these kind of hard-hitting pieces. I think that's changed over time, but what's been interesting is what you've seen the innovations that started in the Huffington Post and the Gawkers of this world, and I still think, by the way, that Nick Denton is one of the most innovative people in publishing today, have blended across now so that if you go to the New York Times, if you go to CNN, you'll see exactly the same dashboards. They may use them in slightly different ways, but, and this is something that happened when we first went into the New York Times. The homepage editor said, there's no way I'll ever use data. Within 3 months, he was our most passionate advocate within the company. So people realize that it's sometimes where these innovations start is not the be-all and end-all. It's actually gone all the way across, and every organization can benefit from it.
Very cool. Well, I think the numbers are turning red, so I don't know how much time we have left, but thank you so much for joining us in the presentation.
You.